I woke up to a faint knock at my bedroom door. Groggy and disoriented, I called out, "Who is it?" My son's voice whispered back, trembling, "Mom, I need to talk to you." He stepped inside, his face pale as a ghost. His words made my blood run cold. I heard something I wasn't supposed to. That moment, I knew our lives were about to change forever. Life had always been a delicate balancing act for me after my divorce. Raising my only son, Tyler, on my own for the past 8 years had been both my greatest joy and my biggest challenge. Tyler, now 19, was my anchor, the kind-hearted, thoughtful boy who grew into a young man shouldering responsibilities far beyond his years. Our bond had always been unshakable. From his shy smiles as a toddler to his quiet determination as a teenager, Tyler had a way of grounding me, even when life felt overwhelming. He was my purpose, my reason to keep going, especially during the darker days when it felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. Our life was simple but steady. I worked long hours to make ends meet, while Tyler threw himself into his first year of college. I saw the stress building in him, long nights studying, the bags under his eyes growing darker. But he rarely complained. He always seemed to put on a brave face, even when I could sense the cracks beneath the surface. That night started like any other. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards and the soft hum of the wind outside. Tyler had gone to bed early, exhausted from his day. As I lay in bed, the moonlight spilling through the curtains, my mind wandered to everything we had been through together. The heartbreak, the sacrifices, and the small victories that made it all worthwhile. I let myself relax, sinking into the mattress as sleep began to claim me. But then came the knock, soft at first, almost as if it were part of my dream. When Tyler's voice broke the silence, it was laced with something I hadn't heard before, fear. As he stepped into the room, his shoulders slumped and his eyes downcast, I could feel the tension radiating from him. "Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "If I told you something bad, something you wouldn't want to hear, would you still love me?" In that moment, my heart shattered and my world shifted. Whatever he was about to say, I knew it would change everything. The days following Tyler's late-night confession were a blur. He had left my room without saying anything more, his words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. I couldn't shake the unease that settled deep in my chest. What could he possibly be hiding? And why was he so afraid to tell me? At first, I tried to act normal, giving Tyler the space I thought he needed. But the tension between us only seemed to grow. He avoided eye contact during breakfast, excused himself from family time, and spent hours locked away in his room. I heard his footsteps pacing late at night, his muffled voice carrying through the walls. He was on edge, and I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't just his behavior that worried me. It was the subtle changes in his demeanor. Tyler had always been a pillar of quiet strength, the kind of person who carried his burdens silently. But now there was an unfamiliar fragility in his eyes. He seemed haunted, his shoulders hunched as if he were carrying a weight too heavy to bear. One evening, as we sat in the living room, I noticed him fidgeting with his phone. His fingers hovered over the screen, trembling slightly. "Tyler, is everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. He froze, his eyes darting to mine before quickly looking away. "Yeah, Mom. Everything's fine," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But everything wasn't fine. The cracks in his facade were becoming impossible to ignore. I started noticing other things too. How he flinched whenever his phone buzzed, how he tucked it away like it held a secret he couldn't afford to share. And then there were the moments when I'd catch him staring off into the distance, his jaw clenched, his thoughts clearly a million miles away. One night, I decided to confront him. As I knocked on his bedroom door, my heart raced. "Tyler?" I called softly. "Can I come in?" After a long pause, he opened the door, his face pale and drawn. "What's wrong?" I asked, stepping inside. He hesitated, his hands fidgeting nervously. "Mom, it's nothing. Really. I'm just tired." I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't ignore the tension in his voice or the way his eyes avoided mine. "Tyler," I said gently, "I know something's bothering you. You don't have to go through it alone." For a moment, it looked like he might open up. His lips parted, his hands clenched at his sides, but then he shook his head. "Not now," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just need some time." I nodded, though my chest ached with worry. "Okay," I said softly. "Whenever you're ready, I'm here." But as I left his room, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever Tyler was hiding was something big. Something that could tear us apart if left unspoken. The air in the house felt heavier, the silence more oppressive. I found myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling and wondering what secrets my son was keeping from me. As the days stretched on, the distance between us grew wider. Tyler was slipping away, and I didn't know how to reach him. The worst part was the fear gnawing at the edges of my mind. Was it already too late? It was a quiet Sunday evening when everything began to change. The air felt heavy, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Tyler had been distant all day, retreating into his room after a few mumbled words at breakfast. I tried to focus on the mundane, folding laundry, preparing dinner, but my mind kept circling back to him. What was going on behind his closed door? What was he so afraid to tell me? As I stood at the kitchen sink, the faint creak of floorboards behind me caught my attention. I turned to find Tyler standing in the doorway, his face pale and his hands shoved deep into his pockets. There was something different about him, an intensity in his eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. "Mom," he said, his voice low and hesitant. "Can we talk?" I nodded, setting the dish towel aside. "Of course. What's on your mind?" He stepped into the room, his movements slow and deliberate. He hesitated, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for the right words. I've been feeling different lately," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "And I don't know how to explain it." I motioned for him to sit at the table, sensing that this was something important. "Take your time," I said gently. "I'm here." He sat down across from me, his posture tense. For a moment he was silent, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his sweatshirt. When he finally spoke, his words came out in a rush. "It's just, sometimes I feel like I can't control my thoughts. Like I'm drawn to things I shouldn't be." His confession hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "Tyler, whatever it is, you can tell me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He shook his head, his expression pained. "It's not that simple, Mom. It's wrong." The anguish in his voice broke my heart. I reached out, placing a hand on his. "Tyler, listen to me. There's nothing you can say that will make me stop loving you. Whatever you're feeling, we can work through it together." He looked down at our hands, his jaw tightening. "You don't understand," he whispered. "If I tell you, it'll change everything." The tension in the room was suffocating. I could feel my chest tightening as I waited for him to continue. But instead of speaking, he pulled his hand away and stood abruptly. "I can't," he said, his voice shaking. I can't." Before I could respond, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me sitting there in stunned silence. I wanted to go after him, to demand that he tell me what was going on, but something held me back. Whatever he was struggling with, it was clear he wasn't ready to share it yet. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my mind. Tyler's words, his expression, the raw vulnerability in his voice, it all pointed to something deeper, something he was terrified to confront. I tried to piece it together, to make sense of the puzzle, but the truth remained just out of reach. In the days that followed, the tension between us only grew. Tyler became more withdrawn, his silences heavier, his gaze more guarded. But there were moments, fleeting, unspoken moments, when I could feel the weight of his feelings pressing down on both of us. Like the time I caught him staring at me across the dinner table, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite identify. Or the time he lingered in the kitchen after grabbing a glass of water, his hand brushing against mine as he reached for the faucet. Each moment felt charged, electric, as if we were both standing on the edge of a cliff, afraid to take the next step. I didn't know what was happening, and it terrified me. But more than that, I was terrified for Tyler. Whatever he was feeling, whatever he was keeping locked away, it was consuming him. And I didn't know how to help. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, I felt the tension between us reach a breaking point. Tyler was sitting closer than usual, his arm brushing against mine every time he shifted. I could feel his gaze on me, even as I pretended to focus on the screen. "Mom," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence. I turned to look at him, my heart racing. "Yes." He hesitated, his expression torn. "I need to tell you something," he said finally. "But I don't know if I can." I placed a hand on his arm, trying to steady my own nerves. "Whatever it is, Tyler, you can tell me. I promise." His eyes met mine, filled with a mix of fear and longing. "I'm scared," he admitted. I nodded, my throat tight. "It's okay to be scared. Just take your time." As the words hovered between us, unspoken and unresolved, I realized that this was only the beginning. Whatever Tyler was struggling with, whatever he was afraid to say, it was about to change our lives forever. The house was silent, the kind of silence that made every creak and whisper of the wind outside feel amplified. Tyler had been acting stranger than ever, his mood swinging unpredictably between tense avoidance and desperate vulnerability. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, unsure of what might shatter first, him or me. It was late, close to midnight, when I heard footsteps on the stairs. My heart jumped, a mix of hope and dread filling my chest. I had been lying awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for some sign that Tyler might finally be ready to talk. The sound of his steps stopped outside my bedroom door, and then, softly, I heard his voice. "Mom? Are you awake?" I sat up immediately, switching on the bedside lamp. "Yes, I'm awake. Come in." The door creaked open and Tyler stepped inside. He looked exhausted, his face pale and his eyes shadowed with something I couldn't quite place. He hesitated at the doorway, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice steady despite the knot of nerves tightening in my stomach. He shook his head, his jaw tightening as he stared at the floor. "No," he said quietly. "It's not." I patted the space beside me on the bed, and after a moment of hesitation, he sat down. The mattress dipped under his weight, and I could feel the tension radiating off him. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. He just sat there, his shoulders hunched and his gaze fixed on his hands. "Tyler," I said gently, "whatever it is, you can tell me." He let out a shaky breath, his fingers twisting together. "It's not that simple, Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What I'm about to tell you, it's going to change everything." My heart pounded in my chest. "Just say it," I urged, my voice softer now. "Whatever it is, we'll deal with it together." He looked at me then, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and vulnerability. "I've been talking to Dad," he said, his voice trembling. "For weeks now. He reached out to me and I didn't know how to tell you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My ex-husband, Daniel, had walked out on us 8 years ago and hadn't looked back. The thought of him suddenly re-entering Tyler's life without warning filled me with anger and confusion. "When did this start?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "A few weeks ago," Tyler admitted. "He called me out of the blue. He said he wanted to reconnect, to fix things." I could feel the anger bubbling beneath my skin, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about me. It was about Tyler. "And how do you feel about that?" I asked carefully. Tyler hesitated, his brow furrowing. "I don't know," he said finally. "Part of me wants to give him a chance, but I don't trust him. And I didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt you." His words brought tears to my eyes. I reached out, placing a hand on his. "Tyler, you don't have to protect me," I said softly. "This is about you. If you want to give him a chance, that's your decision. But you don't have to go through it alone." He nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thanks, Mom." For a moment, the tension seemed to ease, but then Tyler's expression darkened. "There's more," he said, his voice barely audible. My heart sank. "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself. He looked away, his jaw tightening. "He's not the only one who's been reaching out. I overheard something." "What did you hear?" I pressed, my chest tightening with dread. Tyler hesitated, his hands gripping the edge of the bed. "I heard someone talking about you, Mom," he said finally. "Someone who said they've been seeing you. That they've been coming over when I'm not home." The room seemed to tilt, the weight of his words crashing down on me. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice shaking. "It was Mr. Parker," Tyler said, his voice filled with tension. "Our neighbor. I overheard him on the phone talking about you. He said you've been together." I felt the blood drain from my face. "That's not true," I said quickly. "I've never." "I don't know what to believe," Tyler interrupted, his voice raw with emotion. "I heard him, Mom. He sounded so sure." My mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was saying. Mr. Parker was a kind, quiet man, our neighbor for years. The idea that he would say something like this, that Tyler would believe it, felt impossible. "I don't know why he would say that," I said, my voice trembling. "But I swear to you, Tyler, it's not true." Tyler looked at me, his eyes searching mine for some kind of truth. "I don't know what's going on," he said finally, his voice breaking. "But I'm scared, Mom. I don't know who to trust." I reached out, pulling him into a hug. "We'll figure this out," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I promise." As we sat there, holding each other, the weight of the secrets and misunderstandings between us felt heavier than ever. I didn't know what was true or what wasn't. All I knew was that Tyler was hurting, and I would do anything to protect him. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever storm was brewing, it was about to tear through our lives, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after Tyler's revelation, the house felt heavier than ever. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, tension hanging like a storm cloud ready to break. I had barely slept, my mind racing with questions. Why would Mr. Parker say those things? Had Daniel's sudden reappearance triggered all of this? And most of all, how could I help Tyler navigate the chaos that had invaded our lives? Tyler had retreated to his room again, his door closed tight. I stood outside for a moment, debating whether to knock, but decided against it. He needed space, and I needed answers. The weight of his words the night before still pressed on my chest. If Mr. Parker had truly been spreading rumors, I couldn't let it slide. Not when it was tearing my son apart. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I walked over to Mr. Parker's house that afternoon. The short walk across the street felt like miles, my heart pounding with every step. I knocked on the door, and when he opened it, his face lit up in a friendly smile. "Hi there," he greeted, his tone warm and casual, as though nothing was amiss. "Mr. Parker," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "We need to talk." His smile faltered slightly, but he stepped aside, inviting me in. "Of course. Is everything okay?" I stepped into his living room, my gaze darting around the familiar space. I turned to face him, crossing my arms. "I need to know why my son overheard you saying certain things about me." Mr. Parker's face froze, a flicker of confusion crossing his features. "What are you talking about?" "Tyler heard you on the phone," I pressed, my voice trembling. "He said you told someone that we've been seeing each other, that we've been together." For a moment he just stared at me, and then his expression shifted into one of shock. "Wait, what? That's not true. I would never." "Then why would Tyler say that?" I demanded, my frustration boiling over. "Why would he think you're spreading rumors about me?" Mr. Parker sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what he heard, but I swear, I haven't said anything like that. I respect you too much to ever. I mean, we've been neighbors for years." His denial felt genuine, but doubt lingered in my mind. "If you're telling the truth," I said, my voice softer now, "then we need to figure out what's going on. Tyler is convinced, and it's tearing us apart." Mr. Parker nodded solemnly. "I'll do whatever I can to help. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding." I left his house with more questions than answers, my mind spinning. If Mr. Parker wasn't lying, then who was? And why would someone want to hurt my family? When I returned home, Tyler was sitting in the living room, his phone in his hand. He looked up as I walked in, his expression guarded. "Where were you?" he asked. "I went to talk to Mr. Parker," I said, sitting down across from him. His eyes widened. "Why?" "Because I needed to hear his side of the story," I said gently. "Tyler, he swears he didn't say those things. He says there's been a misunderstanding." Tyler frowned, his jaw tightening. "He's lying." "I don't think he is," I said carefully. "But I do think someone might be trying to cause trouble." Tyler's hands clenched around his phone, his expression a mix of anger and confusion. "Why would someone do that?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I believe you, Tyler. I know you wouldn't lie about this. We just need to figure out what's really going on." For the first time in days, Tyler's expression softened. "You believe me?" he asked quietly. "Of course I do," I said, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "We're in this together, no matter what." The tension between us eased slightly, but the questions remained. Over the next few days, Tyler and I worked to piece things together. I reached out to a few mutual acquaintances, trying to trace the source of the rumor. Tyler, meanwhile, grew more withdrawn, his trust shaken by everything that had happened. The hardest part was watching him struggle. Tyler had always been my rock, the one person I could count on. Seeing him so vulnerable, so unsure of himself, was heartbreaking. I tried to be strong for him, but the weight of it all was taking its toll on me too. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, Tyler turned to me, his expression serious. "Mom," he said, his voice hesitant, "I need to know. Do you think Dad has something to do with this?" The question caught me off guard. "Why would you think that?" He shrugged, his gaze distant. "I don't know. It just feels like too much of a coincidence. He shows up out of nowhere. And then this happens." I considered his words, the pieces clicking into place. Could Daniel really be behind this? It seemed far-fetched, but at the same time, his reappearance had stirred up so much. I couldn't rule it out. "I don't know, Tyler," I said honestly. "But if he is, we'll find out." That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Tyler was right. Something bigger was at play here, something that went beyond a simple misunderstanding. And whoever was behind it, they were trying to break us apart. But they underestimated one thing. Tyler and I had been through too much together to let this destroy us. Whatever came next, we would face it side by side. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions, revelations, and hard conversations. Tyler and I worked together to uncover the truth, piecing together the puzzle that had disrupted our lives. Slowly, we began to untangle the web of lies and misunderstandings. It turned out that the source of the rumors was neither Mr. Parker nor Daniel. Instead, it was a mutual acquaintance who had taken a passing observation, Mr. Parker helping me carry groceries one afternoon, and twisted it into something sordid. They had shared their fabricated story with others, and somehow, it had reached Tyler's ears in the worst way possible. The realization left me furious, but also relieved. At least the accusations against Mr. Parker and myself had no real basis. When I told Tyler the truth, his shoulders seemed to sag with relief. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "I should have come to you first instead of letting it eat at me." I pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly. "You don't have to apologize," I said softly. "You were hurting and you didn't know what to do. I just wish you'd trusted me sooner." He nodded, his head resting against my shoulder. "I'll do better. I promise." In the days that followed, Tyler began to open up more, not just about the rumors, but about everything he'd been holding inside. He admitted how hard it had been to navigate his first year of college, how the pressure to succeed had left him feeling isolated and unsure of himself. He even shared how conflicted he felt about reconnecting with his father, unsure if he could trust Daniel after all these years. For my part, I realized how much I had been taking for granted. Tyler had always seemed so strong, so self-sufficient, that I hadn't noticed the cracks forming beneath the surface. I made a promise to myself to pay closer attention, to be more present for him, not just as his mother, but as someone he could confide in without fear of judgment. One evening, as we sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Tyler turned to me with a small smile. "You know," he said, "I was scared that everything was falling apart. But I think this made us stronger." I nodded, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "It did," I agreed. "And no matter what happens, we'll get through it together." The experience taught both of us a powerful lesson. For Tyler, it was a reminder that he didn't have to carry his burdens alone, that he had someone who loved him unconditionally no matter what. For me, it was a wake-up call about the importance of communication, trust, and being there for the people who matter most. As for Daniel, his reappearance remained a complicated chapter. Tyler eventually decided to meet with him, cautiously and on his own terms. I respected his decision, though I stayed close, ready to offer support if he needed it. Their relationship was far from perfect, but it was a start, a step toward healing wounds that had lingered for far too long. Life didn't return to normal overnight, but it did settle into a new rhythm. The tension between Tyler and me eased, replaced by a renewed sense of trust and understanding. We talked more, laughed more, and found comfort in the strength of our bond. Looking back, I realized that the storm we had weathered was a test, not just of our relationship, but of our resilience. It showed me that even in the face of misunderstanding, fear, and pain, love could prevail. It reminded me that no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, we would always find our way back to each other. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for weeks. Tyler glanced at me, his expression calm and content. "Thanks, Mom," he said quietly. "For everything." I smiled, my heart full. "Always. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Have you ever faced a situation where trust and love were put to the test? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that explore the twists and turns of life. And stay tuned. Our next story will leave you speechless.